Good evening and thank you for joining us. It's a big loss for those living on the street, as a Thunder Bay shelter house has announced the end of its street outreach service due to funding pressures. The SOS program has operated since 2014.
But another organization, Elevate NWO, is now fundraising for a new van to support its own street outreach work. Lee Noonan reports.
The SOS van hasn't been on the road since June, but now the program is being ended for good. Shelter House Executive Director Cal Rankin says the organization has had to prioritize their core activities of sheltering and feeding people in the face of reduced funding, declining donations, staffing challenges, increasing expenses, and growing need. Even after cutting the SOS program, Rankin says the shelter house is still looking at a $200,000 deficit this year.
The need is climbing. I think that's evident. I mean, people just have to drive around town, and you can see people that are homeless and struggling all over. I mean, the lack of housing is contributing to that.
The SOS program had provided food and supplies and offered transportation to people living on the streets of Thunder Bay, services that are particularly crucial as the mercury drops.
It's going to cost people some lives, because there's people at 10, 11 o'clock that need to go to the hospital, or especially when it gets cold out, they sit down, they fall asleep because it's cold.
These are all people. It's not like you can lift a rug and kick dirt under it. No, you can't do that. So you can't stop. You just can't.
Across town, Elevate NWO is hoping to help fill the void by enhancing their own program. One member of Elevate's street outreach team spoke about the impact of losing SOS.
People, we get stranded, and that was a big help. You would call them, and they would show up and take you to the Salvation Army. They would take you to the shelter house.
For now, Elevate is running its outreach program out of Executive Director Holly Gauvin's old car. They're looking to raise $80,000 for a new specialized van. Gauvin says they intend to continue offering street outreach even after their program funding runs out on October 31st. But she's worried about the impact of funding shortages on programs that support the homeless.
We're going to continue to see an escalation in infectious diseases. We're going to continue to see an escalation in people having to access emergency health care. We're going to continue to see people camped out outdoors during 40 below weather, and that is going to be a risk to health and life.
Anyone wanting to donate to the new van fund can come by Elevate's offices at the back of 106 Cumberland Street between 9 and 4, Monday to Friday, or just keep an eye on their Facebook page. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
One person has died in a plane crash near Kenora. An amateur-built aircraft crashed on Shore Island on Lake of the Woods at around 8 o'clock last night. The deceased pilot's name hasn't yet been released. There were no other occupants. Kenora OPP and the Transportation Safety Board are investigating.
Officials at the Thunder Bay Airport are providing more details about a plane that experienced landing gear failure while taxiing on the runway yesterday afternoon. No one was hurt, but all arrivals and departures had to be delayed for several hours. The incident stranded this charter aircraft on the runway just before 3 o'clock. The 5 people on board all managed to get off the plane safely. Manager of Airport Services, Ryan Brading, says each scenario is different whenever there's a disabled aircraft on the runway. They need to assess what the issue is and what type of equipment is needed to repair it and remove the aircraft. Brading notes it wasn't an easy fix this time.
Yesterday's incident was a little bit more complex than what we were used to seeing. So that's the reason why we had to put some additional staff out on the runway. The airline that owned the aircraft also sent some AMEs, some aircraft mechanics out to assist as it was their aircraft. And just around 5 p.m. local, we were able to reopen the runway.
Brading says it's unfortunate that the incident clogged up the runway for other incoming and outgoing flights, but insists it was out of the airport authorities' control, and he adds those planes did later return to Thunder Bay.
Meanwhile, the airport runway construction has reached its next phase. The big project began back on May 6 to upgrade almost every facet of the main runway and supporting infrastructure. It's now getting close to completion. As Mitchell Ringos tells us, part of the primary runway has now reopened.
You may have noticed planes once again landing on the airport's main runway, but that doesn't mean construction has come to a close, as the work has proceeded from the east side down to the west side. Airport President Ed Schmidtke says the construction has gone very well, but has been challenging, with the need to make sure the construction crews can carry out the work safely while there's an active airfield going, especially with where the construction is currently located.
It's now at a point where it's right in the intersection of the two, so the secondary runway is closed during that time, and the primary runway, that is the location for the construction, is shorter than normal and will be till about October 31.
The $20 million project will see upgrades to the asphalt, which is being milled and paved to a 150-millimeter depth, and a reduction to the width of the runway, which will be fully compliant with the latest standards, which Schmidtke says will add tremendous value for the airlines and other aircraft they serve.
The availability, because we've got newer approach lights and runway lights that are easier to see, that provide better guidance, the new pavement that just means that for the next 20 years, we're hoping that runway is going to be working at full capacity.
Schmidtke expects to have the main runway back to full length by October 31st, allowing jet service to be available once again starting November 1st. Mitchell Ringos, TBT News.
The jury in the Courtney LaBelle murder trial is now deliberating, trying to reach a unanimous verdict. A warning to viewers, the details of this case are disturbing. LaBelle is accused of stabbing her 11-year-old son to death in January of 2020. Today, during final submissions, LaBelle's lawyer, Gil Labine, said his client was in a drug-induced psychosis when she stabbed her son 31 times. Because of that, he wants the jury to find her guilty of manslaughter, not of second-degree murder. The Crown argued that despite the drug use, LaBelle was aware that her actions would likely cause the victim's death. The jury will remain sequestered until a verdict is reached. The full details can be found on tbnewswatch.com.
Toronto MPP Merritt Stiles has become the first candidate to enter the Ontario NDP leadership race.
I'm launching my campaign for Leader of Ontario's NDP to be your next premier, so that hardworking Ontario people have a government on their side once and for all.
The former school trustee has been a legislator since 2018 and serves as the NDP education critic. Stiles says she's aiming to beat Conservative Premier Doug Ford, whom she's openly criticized for his health and education plans. The party's top job became available after its longtime leader, Andrea Horwath, announced her resignation, after the party secured just 31 seats in the June provincial election.
Pay now or pay more later. That's the message from Ontario's Financial Accountability Office. The FAO, in a newly released report, is now urging Premier Doug Ford to climate-proof the province's roads and transit infrastructure. Siobhan Morris explains.
Our warming planet is putting more strain on Ontario's roads, bridges, and rail tracks. The province's financial watchdog warns more needs to be done to prepare for what may be ahead.
Decisions made today need to take into account climate conditions in the future, because those infrastructure pieces will be subject to that.
Weltman concedes no one can predict exactly what climate pollution will look like in the future, but if emissions peak in 2050, we're looking at about an extra $2.2 billion a year to maintain infrastructure. If emissions get worse, that number jumps to $4.1 billion by 2100. On the flip side, making changes to make infrastructure more resilient could cost between $1.4 and $2.9 billion a year by the end of the century. Still a lot of money, but Weltman says adapting is a lot easier for the province and cities to manage, and there are other considerations.
We're not estimating the economic impact of having that road washed out, kind of like we saw in BC last year with that road washed out. Supply chains were disrupted, folks were cut off from the mainland. There was fairly large economic disruption.
For the Green Party leader who asked for this report,
we simply cannot afford to deny the crisis that we face.
Mike Schreiner is calling on the government to make moves to protect roads, rails, and bridges.
To implement a dedicated climate adaptation fund so that both provincial and municipal infrastructure is climate ready.
The Greens are also pushing to cut climate pollution in half by 2030.
Another hit to the bank account is coming, this time for Enbridge gas customers. The Ontario Energy Board has approved a rate increase that will take effect on October 1st. It will add about $90 a year to a typical household bill here in the Northwest.
The market price for natural gas has increased a number of times over the past year, predominantly due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Also, we see more gas that's being exported by liquefied natural gas to areas like Europe, who are currently constrained and having natural gas. As a result, those prices have gone up.
Staff encourages anyone who's struggling to pay their bill to reach out to the utility to arrange a payment plan. Enbridge is also asking customers to submit their own monthly meter readings, if possible. Typically, meter readings are done by employees every other month, but due to staffing challenges, that's now happening less frequently. It's forced the utility to rely more heavily on estimates based off historical usage. Those who've undertaken recent renovations in particular could be in for a surprise once Enbridge is able to do an in-person reading.
Have there been any changes to your consumption? If you put in a pool heater, if you have, added different appliances, also if you've undertaken some energy efficiency initiatives that might have reduced your gas, you might want to think about submitting an estimate so that you can be closer to what your actual use is.
Staff notes all bills will be adjusted in time to reflect a customer's actual gas usage. More details are available on the Enbridge website.
After being rained out last week ahead of the Wake the Giant Music Festival, DFC High School held its annual Amazing Race for students today to help them get to know their new city and navigate Thunder Bay's transit system. Avery McRae reports.
Regarded as one of the biggest orientation events in the country, DFC's Amazing Race takes its students from end to end in Thunder Bay with teacher supervision, introducing the Indigenous youth from northern remote communities to a number of key locations in the city, such as LU, the NAN office, and the regional hospital.
It's been really useful because the one we just came from, Yes Employment, I think that'll help me with my help me later in life.
A lot of our students are new to the city and their main way of getting around is city transit. So we want them to learn a whole bunch of different routes in a supervised environment before they go out on their own.
Julian Beardy was just one of roughly 160 students split into 9 teams from DFC, hopping from bus to bus, and he admits his favorite stop of the day was Marina Park for a pizza lunch break sponsored by Impala Canada. Even for someone who was born and raised in Thunder Bay, navigating the city's public transit system can be challenging, which has students thankful to have this event early in the school year.
Yeah, it's confusing, but I have people that help me.
The students who have done it in the past act as leaders, and they actually show some of our staff members the bus routes as well.
Grade 10 student Melissa Tate is one of those returning students and admits watching her classmates experience the city for the first time is pretty amusing.
Pretty good. It was pretty entertaining. This one took a lot faster and more funner.
For anyone moving to a new city, especially coming from the remote north, it can be a culture shock, and Tate has some simple advice for all those who ever feel lost in the hub of northwestern Ontario.
Don't be scared to ask questions.
Avery McRae, TBT News.
Local Tim Hortons stores are hoping to once again break records with the number of Smile cookies sold, and that will be a tall order due to the huge amount raised last year. The 2021 campaign saw more than $80,000 raised. Today, some local firefighters were back at several Tim's outlets, helping out and promoting the campaign. The local funds raised get split between Toys for Tots and the George Jeffreys Children's Foundation. The chair of the firefighters' Toys for Tots campaign, Paul Penna, says the Smile cookie proceeds are a huge helping hand each year.
The kickstart that we get each and every year from the Tim's owners to start our campaign in November is incredible. Last year, $40,000. I mean, what can you say? We thought we were in trouble the last couple of years with COVID. And you know, the way Tim's Smile Cookie campaign kickstarted us, it just drove us to success, really.
And you still have time to go grab a Smile cookie or a whole bunch of them, as the campaign will continue to run until Sunday.
What a great campaign that is. People love their Smile cookies. And
absolutely.
of course, they go to some great charities. Well, Fiona, it's another cool one out there today as we celebrate the start of fall.
Yeah, definitely a bit on the chilly side. Had a low of 6, a high of 13, and winds from the north, very light, but that northerly air, little bit nippy at times under partly to mostly sunny skies. The sunshine continues to the west at this hour. To the west, temperatures overnight were frighteningly close to the freezing mark, 1, 2 Celsius for the most part. So this is actually not a bad way to wrap up the afternoon. 13 in Fort Francis, 12 in Dryden, 11 in Kenora, 13 in Red Lake and Pickle Lake, and even up into Big Trout Lake. As we head eastward, we're at 12 in Sioux Lookout, Armstrong, Greenstone 11, and they're under mostly cloudy skies at this time. Marathon 10. Sault Ste. Marie had a much milder night than other parts of the region, but not much of a warm-up today, so it's all kind of evened out there, currently at 11 under sunny skies. Now, here in the city of Thunder Bay tonight, we are going to drop back down into the single digits, 4 Celsius under clear to partly cloudy skies, with winds starting to rotate around and come in from the west-southwest. Temperatures are expected to rise over the next couple of days. Unfortunately, despite the return of the seasonal temperatures, there's also going to be a return of potential rain. Now, this is not heavy rainfall by any means for our region, but as you can see, it's very widespread throughout the Great Lakes and most of northwestern Ontario, which means we could be in for a very gray weekend. I'll have more details later on in the news hour.
Okay, thanks a lot, Fiona. So not great news, but of course we're always reminded that it could be a lot worse. Canada's maritime provinces are bracing for, and storm preparations are underway there. That's because Hurricane Fiona is set to make landfall tomorrow evening. We'll have all the details as your news hour continues.
You don't want to create panic, but you also want to make sure people are prepared for that, and it's definitely beyond what we're used to, so people should take it seriously.